As Christians, one of our most basic confessions is Jesus is Lord. But how often do we really stop and ask ourselves, just what does that mean? And does my life really reflect His Lordship?
Attention, attention. Stay tuned for an incoming transmission.
This is Radio Free Ecclesia, the pirate radio broadcast to the citizens of God's kingdom living in enemy-occupied territory. Jesus is Lord. That simple phrase, those three little words, have defined my life as a Christian for over 35 years now. I want to take a little time here and just give you a brief summary of my own story and explain how those three words have really come to define me and how over time wrestling with those words and just what they mean continue to help me to understand just what it means to be a Christian, to be a follower of Christ, and to talk a little bit about where that wrestling has brought me to this very day. Some people have really dramatic testimonies about how they came to be a Christian. They talk about an old way of life and how they went through this really, really dramatic transformation from an old way of life to a new way of life. My story isn't quite as exciting. It isn't quite as dramatic. I was raised in a Christian home by parents who love God and do so to this very day. I grew up going to church. I grew up going to Sunday school and being a part of the youth group in my church. My parents and my brother and I, we read from the Bible every single night. And in all honesty, my faith in Jesus was something that was established at a very early age. In fact, when I was in elementary school, my parents actually gave me the option of transferring to a Christian school when I entered into junior high. And I was very excited about that. I thought, man, what a great idea, going to a school where I can have Bible classes in addition to my normal school life. And so I made the decision on my own to go to a Christian school for my junior high and high school years. But it was during that time that I actually began to stray from the Lordship of Jesus. During my teen years, I didn't live a life of obedience to God. It's for a variety of reasons. I know a lot of us can probably relate to the whole idea of the teen angst, the desire to fit in, and I didn't really fit in very well when I was a teenager. Even at a Christian school, I just didn't find a group that I really fit in well. I was this nerdy little kid who wasn't good at sports, and it just was a struggle for me. And unfortunately, the group that I found acceptance in was a group that wasn't seeking first God's kingdom and His righteousness. And so I found myself just following their lead in a lot of different ways. And so even though I wasn't like this, horrible reprobate person, I certainly wasn't living a life of obedience to God during my high school years. But I remember very well something that happened the summer after I graduated. That summer, God began to move in my heart. It didn't happen at a retreat or a church camp or at church or anything like that. It was something that just happened in the quiet place of my heart. You see, during all that time where I wasn't living a life of obedience, I never denied Jesus. If you would have asked me during that time, is Jesus the Christ, the Son of God? Did He die? Did He rise from the dead? I would have said, yes. Yes, He did. I liked going to a Christian school. I liked my Bible classes. I liked studying the Bible. But at the same time, I was living this double life. And that summer after I graduated, God began to impress upon me something that changed me for the rest of my life. He showed me that I was saying that Jesus is Lord, but I wasn't living like Jesus is Lord. And I knew that I couldn't live that life. I had to make a decision, and I did. It wasn't like I got down on my knees one night and prayed. It was just this realization. It was like I just woke up and said, I am going to live with Jesus as my Lord. My life is going to reflect his lordship. And that has defined my life. That was over 35 years ago. And my life since then has been an exploration of what that means. What does it mean to live a life that reflects the lordship of Jesus? What is the practical application of those three little words? Jesus is Lord. So over 35 years, that exploration has produced a lot of different results. At various stages, I've come to realize the kind of transformations that requires. Transformations in terms of the way I think, in terms of my values and my priorities, in terms of my lifestyle. And it's a journey that I'm still on and will certainly be on till the day I die. But recently, something has been standing out to me more than ever. Jesus said in John's Gospel, "A servant is not greater than his master." That means that whatever Jesus was, we are not going to be any greater than that. We have to actually embrace his example in his life. And what this has meant for me in my recent growth is an understanding of how Jesus embraced lowliness. Jesus didn't embrace being the guy in charge. He didn't try to be the boss. He didn't try to elevate himself above the people around him. As I've said in other episodes, Jesus didn't invade the halls of power politically, economically, socially. Jesus was nobody in terms of how this world understands greatness. Jesus embraced meekness. He said that if you want to enter the kingdom, you have to be like a child. Well, children have no power over other people. They have no authority. They have no status. They're the lowest members of society. Jesus said if you wanted to be great in the kingdom, if you want to be great in the kingdom, you have to embrace the status of a slave. Again, the lowest member of society, the person who has no power over others. The Apostle Paul in Philippians 2 talks about how Jesus did not see equality with God as something he had to cling to, but he emptied himself of that status, and as Paul said, became a slave. If we are not greater than our Master Jesus, that means we are not going to be great if we want to be a part of his kingdom. We have to embrace that kind of lowliness, that status of not having power, not being able to dictate to others, of being the ones that really are of no account. In fact, that's exactly what Jesus' life was, a life in terms of the world of someone of no account. Now, to say that Jesus' life was a life of no account, I'm sure is going to be surprising to many of you, because as Christians, we're just so used to thinking of Jesus as the most significant person in all of human history. And even broader popular history recognizes the significance of Jesus. But go back and look at the records of Jesus' time. There were people writing histories at the time of Jesus, the Romans, the Greeks, even the Jews. And it's really interesting to note how Jesus is absent from the records of the great powers of that time. Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, the most consequential person in all of human history, was completely overlooked by the powerful people and institutions of his time. Why? Because, from their point of view, he was a nobody. He was a peasant from a rural place in a corner of the empire, a place where significant things didn't happen and significant people didn't come from. And even when he died, it was completely overlooked, didn't make it into the record books. Because again, from the perspective of the great powers of the world, he was absolutely nobody. And there's something there that helps us to understand how God works in this world. God works through things that don't even register on the cameras and the radars of the great powers of this world. And I think that as Christians, sometimes we forget that. We want to be a part of those powerful institutions, and we want to be a part of those powerful people because we think that having your hands on the levers of those things is how you get things done in the world. But Jesus said, no, that's not how it happens in his kingdom. Jesus didn't put his hand on those levers because he didn't need to. God doesn't accomplish anything by those means. The greatest event in human history, the greatest event in the outworking of God's plan for humanity in this world, happened in a way that was completely overlooked by the world. And are we willing to be a people that in terms of the world are completely overlooked because the world says there's nothing special there? To embrace the lordship of Jesus is to follow his example. It's to embrace an approach to life that the world would laugh at, that would mock, that it would think is foolish. The world looks for greatness in the world's term, through wealth and power and celebrity. God's kingdom just doesn't play by those rules. We see things through a radically different lens. We don't need to be great in the world's terms. In fact, I think so many of the things that we see in the Bible are explained by this principle. Like I've had people find fault with the Bible, like the Exodus story, because outside of the Bible, there's no record of the Exodus story, the plagues on the Egyptians and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, well, this is a made-up story because it doesn't show up in the records of the ancient world. Well, maybe, like the death of Jesus, the reason it doesn't show up is because from the perspective of the Egyptians, they went, not a big deal. They didn't see God working. They didn't see the greatness. God's people saw the greatness of God revealed, but they didn't. They just passed it over. No pun intended. Jesus' death, the greatest event in human history, passed over by the world. And are we willing to embrace the status of people that will never be considered great in the world's terms of power or prestige or status or influence? But recognize that it's that very status, that lowly, insignificant status from the world's point of view, that is exactly how God's kingdom advances. I've spent over 35 years reflecting on that lordship of Jesus. What does it mean for Jesus to be Lord? And again, I've learned a lot. There's been a lot of different ways that's played out in my understanding and in my life. But most recently, this is the thing that has stood out the most. It's the thing that I'm praying about and asking God to cultivate in me more and more every single day. A willingness to embrace that lowly status, powerless status of meekness, of humility, of being willing to just be completely overlooked in terms of how the world defines greatness. But understanding that that's when the power of God's kingdom is revealed, that God's greatness and his glory are revealed when we follow Jesus' example and embrace that kind of lowliness of status.